This video is going to cover the topic of finding the whole. Be sure the date and topic are at the top of your page. The essential question for this video will be, how can we find the original number, which I'll refer to as the whole, if we know the percent or the value of the percent? This is the trickiest part of our percent work that we'll do this year for most students. So far we've learned how to do work like finding the percent of a number. For example, we learned how to find 15% of 50. We've also been able to find the percent. For example, we've been able to figure out what percent 3 out of 20 would be. Right? So those are things we've done already. Sometimes, however, we need to find an original number when all we know is the value of a percent. The good news is we can use the same ratio strategy to help us, right? And remember, as always, that percent is out of 100. We always want to keep that in mind, right? So that we can set up our equivalent ratios. And remember how our equivalent ratios will look. The part of whatever whole we have is going to be equal to the percent out of 100. So I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about when I'm saying that we know the value, but we don't know the original number. Take a look at this question. Right? This is different from our previous work with percents. Think about what we know, right? So what we know already is the percent. We know that if 100 kids were in the class, 20 would have walked. But we also know that in the real life data, there are only 5 kids who actually walked, right? 20 kids didn't walk. But what we don't know is how many kids there are to start with. Right? We don't know the whole. We don't know the whole number. We know the part, we know the percent, but we don't know the whole. So let's set up our proportion. It's really important when you set up these proportions or equivalent ratios that we have everything in the right place. So remember, it's part over whole is our equivalent ratio to a percent out of 100. Well, the percent out of 100 we know, right? We know it's always out of 100. That will always be there. And we know that it's 20%. So it's 20 out of 100 kids. Right? We also know that there are 5 kids in first period. That's 5 kids who walked in first period. That's the part, right? We know the part of the class who walked. So I'll put that on top. What we don't know is how many kids are in the whole class. Right? So this is a pretty friendly number that I'm starting with, right? If you look at it, you can probably tell right away that 5 had to be multiplied by 4 to make 20, right? And so, of course, I would have to do the same thing here. Some number times 4 is 100. Right? And I'm hoping we all know this, but if we don't, right, we could divide 100 by 4 and get an answer of 25, which means that this is 25. There are 25 kids total, right? That's what we know with the information that we were given. Right? So we just worked a little backwards to figure out how much the whole was. Let's try another one. So in this case, right, I still want to set up my proportion, and I want to think about what I know and what I don't know. Right? So I know that he got an 80%. So if I'm setting up my proportion out of 100, had there been 100 questions, he would have gotten 80 of them right. That's what it means to get an 80%. But he didn't answer 80 questions right. He answered 32 questions. The thing we don't know is how many questions were on the test, right? We don't know the whole. We don't know the total amount. So I'm going to say that he had 32 questions correct, but I don't know what the whole is, right? And I can always represent this also with a variable. So some of us are starting to do that. I've seen that in class, where we're using some letters to represent the numbers we don't know. This question might take a little bit longer to calculate. The numbers are not as friendly, but take a moment and see what you can find, right? To ask yourself, 32 times what is 80? And then what number would have to go here to make these ratios equivalent? So take a moment, pause the video, and then unpause the video, and we'll see if we did the same thing and if we got the same result. How'd you do? Did you find out that there were 40 questions on the test? Hopefully you did, right? If you had a little bit of a hard time, right, make sure you're thinking to yourself, 32 times what is 80? You might have had to divide 80 by 32 to figure that out. But it ended up being 2.5, right? So that means this was multiplied by 2.5. And then again, you have to think, what number times 2.5 is 100? If that doesn't come naturally to you, right, you can always divide 100 by 2.5 to figure it out, and you should have gotten 40. So our missing number here was 40. For Connor to have gotten an 80% on the test, he must have gotten 32 out of 40 questions correct. Let's do one last question. Right, we'll make this one a little bit friendlier, and also I'm not going to use a story this time. What I want to know is 30 is 60% of what number? And I'm actually going to ask you guys to go ahead and set this up and put your answer in. I am not going to put my answer, but I'm going to be looking for your answer when I check your homework tomorrow. So be sure to go ahead and calculate that and have that answer ready to show me. Remember that the essential question for the video was how can we find the original number, also known as the whole, if we just know the percent. And hopefully you've had a chance to see that. We'll practice that some more in class. I'll also be looking for your answer to that last question when you come into class